Welcome to the latest episode of ENT Critical Targets podcast, in which we look at the ways the engineering, science and technology sectors can help create a better future for everyone. In this episode, we're going to look at our critical target for alternative energy sources. And as always, we have a champion to talk us through the issues. And today, providing the expertise is James Bamborough. James is new Sustainability and Net Zero Policy Manager at the IET, only starting in this role after Easter this year. Prior to that, James has had roles within the Policy and Public Affairs team at Engineering UK, and also in Parliament, working alongside the then shadow Industrial Strategy, Science and Innovation Minister. So welcome to you, James, and perhaps I could start by asking you about your experience working in Parliament. I'm curious to know what sort of process a new government will be going through at the moment as they try and define what their objectives are, who's going to be in charge of them, and how they're going to go about it. And are you hopeful that this new administration has hit the ground running?
Thank you, Tim, and it's a delight to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. As you touched upon in my background, I did previously work in Parliament across both the BEIS and DCMS teams, the shadow teams for the Labour Party. This was at a time of great upheaval in politics. We had an extremely broad brief in the team that ranged from everything from space to the post office to the vaccine rollout during the pandemic. We were very, very busy. I feel like we did an awful lot of good work. It gave me a really great insight into exactly how Parliament works, how Parliament procedure works, and the urgency with which we need to tackle a number of challenges. To address your question at the end, yes, I really do hope that the government are going to hit the ground running. I've heard that Sue Gray did a lot of groundwork. I read before the election that she began drafting a number of bills just in case Labour had won, so they can hit the ground running there. And the Prime Minister has also been pretty clear on what he wants to deliver. They've quickly appointed Chris Stark to mission control, and I've already had meetings with Desnes who seem excited and positive about this. We'll continue to have those meetings moving forward. Now, a new government will be getting a lot of briefing from civil servants. They'll be getting up to speed. You heard the Prime Minister yesterday mentioned that his Secretary of State had discovered a number of holes in provision and planning. How much of that was political presentation, I don't know, but that's certainly going to be the case, and there's going to be a lot of that. Up until last week, the government only had access to the things that are public record that you and I could look up. And now they'll be looking under the bonnet. And we're lucky that UK democracy is strong and relatively transparent, so there shouldn't be too many surprises. But as I know, bedding into a new job takes time. The unfortunate issue is the government don't have time. They're in a very unique situation. Already, we've seen Ed Miliband lift the ban on onshore wind farms. We've seen confirmation of the Skills Bill, Rail Reform Bill, the National Wealth Fund, and commitments to defence. So they seem to have hit the ground running, and they've been very quick, but there's so much more work to do.
So do you think, looking at we saw the King's speech yesterday, but also the personnel that the new Labour government have got involved, and I'm sorry for making this so UK-centric, because what we're talking about here within our critical targets is very much a global issue, of course. But in terms of the things that we're particularly interested in on ENT magazine, and of course the IET as well, like science, engineering, STEM, education, technology, and so on, how interested do you think this new government is going to be?
Well, I hope they're going to be very interested. They were quick to appoint Patrick Vallance to the position of Science Minister, somebody with extensive experience in that area. So they're very clearly taking it seriously. Now, something that I've always said is that engineering and politics are the twin engines of growth. They've spoken a lot about growth. So ultimately, the solutions lie in engineering. The Labour Party manifesto mentioned science, technology, engineering and maths about 20 times in their manifesto out of 120 pages. It's about one mention every 6 pages. It's relatively consistent. It's one of the more popular themes. And there was a lot of meat to the bones on some of their plans. For example, 10-year research and development budgets to allow security and development in that area. The King's speech was positive as well, as I've mentioned a number of the bills that came through, have been committed to, such as the Skills Bill, Great British Energy, which is something that we will look really closely at and help to inform the government on how best to deploy Great British Energy. Then utilising nuclear power as well, building Hinkley Point C, Sizewell C, and really looking to build that holistic, full whole systems approach across the energy system.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that a little bit later, if we may. But the sustainability issue, and I think mostly people agree that the most pressing environmental challenge we face is climate change. And if we're going to be serious about reaching the targets set by the Paris Agreement of limiting the Earth's post-industrial revolution temperature by 1.5 degrees by 2050, then we need to start respecting and meeting the targets that are the stepping stones along the way. And it turns out that this new government, assuming it governs for the full 5 years, that is, will effectively have to plan for that term of office being responsible for meeting some of those targets that need to be met by 2030. It feels like this has to be real for them. Are they ready to really take action to meet these targets?
Well, I'd sincerely hope that they are ready and they shouldn't be shocked by these targets, as they've been reconfirmed in Labour manifestos for the best part of a decade now. So I'd like to think that they have pre-planned which levers they need to pull. However, they won't know everything. The job of government is to inform themselves and make decisions. It's our job as an organisation like the IET to help inform those decisions. And this is where we can step in and provide some expert guidance. And I'd encourage anybody from government that's listening to this podcast, get in touch with me. I'd be delighted to help you plug any blind spots that you have in the roadmap to the 2030, 2035 or 2050 targets. Now, there's several possible routes to a net zero energy system. And while it's not clear yet exactly which one the government will prioritise, we hope that they take them all into account in that whole systems approach. Heavy electrification of heating and transport, storage and flexibility, alternative fuel sources such as hydrogen, biofuels. A small amount of fossil fuels will still be used leading up till 2050, but they will need to be offset, of course. And that kind of wider system structure. Now, clean power, of course, is going to be a key part of that. And the transition to do that is vital to meet those commitments that the governments have. Our current sustainable generation output is 133 terawatts an hour. We estimate that the power demand in 2050 will be 4 times this figure, around 600. So there has to be urgency and there has to be understanding of the scale of the solution that we need to deploy across the country.
Okay, well, that ties in with what I'd like to move on to now, and that is our own target. That's our critical target, which we're here to discuss today. And the one we set back in 2021 for the alternative energy category was that we said by 2050, no energy must be generated using fossil fuels. You just said that you don't think it's possible that we could perhaps completely phase that out. But this is a huge... Sorry, go on, James.
Sorry, Tim. It's not that I don't think it's possible, but I think that current planning accounts for the existence of the use of some fossil fuels.
Okay. Well, that leads on to what I was going to ask you, because this is a huge topic, obviously, so many issues within it. But I was going to ask if you think that it is achievable, or will we, with the current levels of technology, or will we need to develop new technology? For example, we could continue to switch over to electric cars and build more solar and wind farms, but realistically, will that approach be enough?
Well, it is possible, but it requires action. Last year, the CCC weren't exactly enthusiastic about the trajectory that we were on to meeting our targets. They pointed out that the timelines were slipping, highlighting a lack of urgency in reducing emissions. For example, the previous government's shift of the 2030 to 2035 target on fossil fuel engine vehicle sales. Now, the new government have already reinstated the 2030 target, which is really positive to see. But what we really need is we need to incorporate the focus on energy efficiency whatever the source, whatever the application, reducing the need for energy and hence the scale of delivery assets must be a real priority. It's particularly important for the existing building stock that we have, where significant savings can be made. Retrofitting improvements are costly. We need the skills to do them. We need to be able to deploy that technology in the places where it's really flourishing, and we need to encourage technology to flourish in regards to that. Now, this includes options for decarbonising heat, transport, and industry, where the most appropriate solution can be selected for each application, along with smarter energy management and control. We've seen a lot of people's houses now have smart meters. The question is, what are we doing with the data from those smart meters? This goes right across the whole system. So even though I am the manager for the Sustainability Net Zero Policy Centre with the IED, my colleague who is the manager for the Digital Futures Policy Centre will also be inputting on a number of these key areas as we work together across the whole economy, really. However, we've recently seen that Microsoft said that they wouldn't be able to meet their carbon targets due to the carbon intensity of storing and processing data in data centers. And it's a little bit like Pop-Up Pirate, the game that we played when we were kids, where we solve one problem and a new one emerges. This is why we need to be flexible and reactive, and the government has to commit to ensuring a quick and frictionless path to the commercialization of emerging technologies that can really help us get there.
Yeah, very much. So, well, one of the emergency technologies I've always thought is tidal energy. I've always thought that could be a saviour because we know exactly when the tides are going to be, so we know exactly how much energy we could produce from them. So it'd be ideal for baseload, obviously. But also there's wave energy. Then there's that tantalisingly out of reach promise of nuclear fusion, which is always 15 or 20 years away. What do you see as the technologies that excite you and that you think have most potential?
Well, as I've said, we need a holistic whole systems approach. We need to ensure that the most appropriate technology is deployed in the most appropriate area. What we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we deploy one technology that might not be the most efficient use of it, and then we have to go back and change it in 30, 40 years' time. We really need to get this right first try. We don't have a second try if we're going to hit these targets. Tidal is a really interesting one that you raise, and it can certainly be part of that. For example, I was at a meeting a few months ago at the Senate, and the presentation brought up the Crooken Power Station Dam that's up in Scotland. It's still actually a tourist attraction, and I believe that Star Wars was filmed there too. So there's a lot of popular engagement that can be built around this kind of infrastructure. It's very expensive, and you need that political will. In the UK, we possess some great tidal and wave power resources, and making good of that, the prospects and opportunities that they present, is all part of the renewables mix. It could potentially provide up to 20% of the UK's electricity needs. And you've seen how offshore wind, for example, has been such a success in some of the Scandinavian countries, such as Denmark and Sweden. I believe Denmark are a net exporter of electricity produced by offshore wind. If the UK can position our offshore wind turbines in the correct place, and we can make sure that they are generating as efficiently and effectively as they can, then that's the kind of use of technology that we really, really need. And we need to make sure it is in that right position.
Okay. I thought I've been to Crooken as well, by the way. I think it's absolutely fascinating, but it doesn't actually generate electricity, does it? It is an energy storage facility. So it would tie in beautifully with wind energy, and you could just distribute it in time. But, however, I would recommend anybody goes to visit it, by the way. So, finally, and it sounds from what you said that you think that phasing out fossil fuels completely within 26 years is possible, but do you think we're on target to do it? And if not, should we be looking at a more realistic target? Or am I being too pessimistic? If we've got the technology and the political will, you said that those are the two drivers earlier, then should we be bringing that target forward?
Targets are important. The one thing that we don't want to do is give industry and business shifting targets so they don't understand the direction in which they need to work. We need to make sure that these targets are set, that we're committed to them, and we have a clear roadmap on how we can meet them. If we can beat it earlier and meet the target earlier, that's fantastic news. But we don't want to start shifting targets around and causing that level of instability and disruption. Furthermore, a lot of this will be related to public confidence. And if we start having targets that we are missing, then this will erode public confidence. And we need to make sure that the public are on side, because if we are going to meet net zero, this is going to be a change in every person's household. It's going to be a change in the way that everybody consumes energy. It's going to be a change in how we put on the washing machine, on how we put on the tumble dryer, and how we drive to work, and how we go on holiday. All of these things are going to change, and we need to make sure that the public are brought along with us. And hitting reliable, practical, pragmatic, and realistic targets that are set in the short, medium, and long term are absolutely vital to do that. As I touched upon earlier, is concerning some of the language coming out from the CCC last year about our progress to doing that, where they said that the government was previously slipping on existing commitments with regards to particularly those pushbacks on fossil fuel vehicles. But as you correctly point out, it's about political will, direction, commitment. The IET are here to help the new government and inform them in the most efficient and effective way to really right the mistakes of the past, and to ensure that A, we can definitely get to 2050, and B, we can get to net zero a little bit quicker than 2050 if we want to, and if we can, and if we can afford it. But I'm quite happy being one-track minded and saying this is the most efficient way of getting there. Government has an awful lot more to consider about how cost-effective things will be, about how expensive it'll be, about the charges that it'll put on individual people's lives. We need to make sure that we communicate these very clearly and openly to avoid confusion and discontent that might emerge if people's bills suddenly go up.
Well, I agree with all of that. So thank you very much, James. We'll end it on that note. It's been fascinating hearing your thoughts on this critical topic. The rest of the Critical Targets podcasts are available on the same platform, so please do give them a listen. In the meantime, I thank you for listening to this one, and of course thanks to our special guest, James Bamborough, who can be contacted through the IET. This is one of 7 episodes in our Critical Target series. You can now listen to all episodes by searching for the ENT Critical Targets wherever you get your podcasts, or by visiting the podcast section on the ENT website.